Scout, a tiny puppy, trails the mail truck, his hidden past poised to transform Willow Creek. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe our channel, Pause Verve. If this story touches your heart, please like the video and share it with others. The morning air in Jefferson City, Missouri, carried the crisp bite of early fall, the kind that made you pull your sweater a little tighter and savor the warmth of a chipped ceramic mug filled with coffee. Helen Harper sat on her front porch, as she had every morning for the past 15 years, her gray braid resting over one shoulder and her hazel eyes scanning the quiet street of Willow Creek Lane. The neighborhood was a patchwork of tidy bungalows, hand-fading picket fences, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, but nobody made a fuss about it. At 67, Ellen liked it that way, predictable, safe, contained. She'd lived here alone since her husband Tom passed 5 years ago, and she'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of solitude. But lately, something had been disrupting that rhythm, and it was sitting right there on her front lawn, bold as brass. The puppy was small, no bigger than a loaf of bread, with scruffy brown fur and a white patch over one eye that made him look like he was perpetually winking. His tail, a stubby little thing, thumped softly against the grass, and his tongue lolled out as if he hadn't a care in the world. Ellen gripped the broom she'd snatched from the hall closet, her heart thudding, like she'd just climbed a flight of stairs. "I better scamper off, Mutt, or I'll call animal control," she called, her voice sharper than she meant it to be. The puppy didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, those big caramel-colored eyes locking onto hers with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and defiance. He plopped his tiny body down as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere, lady." Ellen's lips pursed. She wasn't heartless. She'd loved dogs once, back when Tom was alive, and their old spaniel, Daisy, would curl up at their feet. But this wasn't her dog, and she didn't trust strays. Strays meant trouble, and trouble was the last thing she needed in her carefully ordered life. She'd been watching this puppy for days now, maybe a week, though it felt longer. Every morning at precisely 8:30 a.m. he'd appear, trotting down the street with a purpose that belied his size, following the mail truck like it was his personal mission. The neighbors had started calling him Scout, a name that stuck, despite nobody knowing where he came from. No collar, no tags, just a tiny bundle of fur with an uncanny sense of schedule. At first it was almost funny. "There goes Scout again," Mrs. Larson from across the street would say, her knitting needles pausing as she chuckled from her rocker. Timmy, the 10-year-old who lived 2 doors down, would race out to watch, his backpack bouncing as he shouted, "He's faster than the truck." Even Clara, the mail carrier, seemed amused, tossing a wave as Scout trailed her white van, his little legs pumping to keep up but never getting too close. Rain or shine, Monday through Saturday, Scout was there, a pint-sized shadow with a wagging tail and a focus that made no sense for a creature so young. Ellen didn't trust it. She'd lived in Willow Creek for nearly 3 decades, long enough to know that quiet neighborhoods could hide sharp edges. Maybe it was the ache of Tom's absence, or maybe it was the way her joints creaked a little louder each year. But something about Scout's relentless routine tugged at her gut, like a warning she couldn't quite name. This morning, though, Scout had veered from his usual path. Instead of sticking to the sidewalk, he'd cut across her lawn, bold as you please, and planted himself right in front of her porch steps. Ellen tightened her grip on the broom, her coffee cooling on the wicker table beside her. "I'm serious." "Pup," she said, stepping forward, "this isn't your yard." Scout's ears twitched, but he didn't budge. He let out a tiny huff, almost like a sigh, and stretched his front paws out, settling in as if he'd claimed the spot for good. Ellen's pulse quickened, not from fear but from something else, annoyance maybe, or the faint stir of curiosity. She didn't want to admit. Why her lawn? Why today? She glanced up the street, half expecting Clara's truck to rumble by, but the road was empty, the neighborhood still waking up. She set the broom against the railing and crossed her arms, studying the puppy. Up close, he was even smaller than she'd thought, his fur a mix of brown and black, with a slight curl at the edges, like he'd been caught in a drizzle and never quite dried off. His white patch gave him a roguish charm, and there was a faint scar above his left paw, barely visible under the fur. He didn't look starved or neglected, But he didn't look pampered either. Just determined. Ellen's frown deepened. "You're not fooling me," she muttered. "You've got no business here." Scout's tail gave a single, slow wag, as if he disagreed but was too polite to argue. The sound of a screen door creaking made Ellen look up. Mrs. Larson was out, her grey curls bobbing as she watered her petunias. "Morning, Ellen," she called. "Looks like you've got a visitor." Her tone was teasing, but there was a warmth in it that made Ellen's cheeks flush. "He's not mine," Ellen replied, louder than necessary. "Just a stray who doesn't know his place." Mrs. Larson laughed, setting her watering can down. "Oh, I don't know. Scout's got a way about him. Clara says he's better at her route than she is." She winked, and Ellen forced a half-smile, unwilling to admit she'd noticed the same thing. Clara had mentioned Scout yesterday, laughing as she handed Ellen her bills. "That pup's got more loyalty than my ex-husband," she'd said, and Ellen had almost smiled then too. Almost. Now, with Scout still sprawled on her lawn, Ellen felt a tug of something she couldn't name. Not affection, she wasn't there, yet but a spark of intrigue. She picked up her coffee mug, the warmth gone, and sat back in her chair, her eyes never leaving the puppy. He was watching her now, his head resting on his paws, as if he knew she was sizing him up. "Your trouble?" she said softly, more to herself than to him. Scout's ears flicked, and for a moment she swore he looked like he was smiling. Ellen reached for the battered notebook she kept on the porch table, a habit she'd picked up after Tom's death, to track the small details of her days. Weather, errands, the occasional bird at the feeder. She flipped it open and jotted down 8:32 a.m., puppy, Scout, on lawn, no collar. Follows mail truck daily. Why here? She tapped the pen against her lip, glancing at Scout again. He was still there, calm as ever, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. The street was starting to stir now. Timmy's bike zoomed past, and a car hummed in the distance. Soon Clara's truck would roll by, and Scout would likely scamper off to follow it, leaving Ellen's lawn and her peace intact. But for now he stayed, and that fact alone was enough to make her wonder what he was really after. The sun climbed higher over Willow Creek Lane, painting the street in soft gold and coaxing the neighborhood into its familiar hum. Ellen Harper remained on her porch, her coffee now cold but her notebook open, the pen still hovering over the page where she'd scribbled about the puppy, Scout, as the neighbors insisted on calling him. The little intruder hadn't moved from her lawn, his scruffy form still sprawled in the grass, tail giving an occasional twitch as if he were keeping time with some invisible clock. Ellen's eyes flicked between him and the street, waiting for the telltale rumble of Clara's mail truck. It was 8:29 a.m., and if Scout's routine held, he'd be up and trotting any second now. Sure enough, as the first notes of the truck's engine echoed from the corner of Maple Drive, Scout's ears perked. He scrambled to his feet, shaking, off a few blades of grass, and gave Ellen one last glance, almost like a polite nod, before bounding toward the sidewalk. His tiny legs moved with surprising speed, carrying him to the edge of the curb just as the white van rounded the bend. Clara, her auburn ponytail bouncing through the open window, slowed to wave at Mrs. Larson, who was now deadheading her petunias. Scout fell into step behind the truck, his stubby tail wagging like a metronome, keeping a precise 5-foot distance as if he'd measured it with a ruler. Ellen couldn't help but lean forward, her skepticism warring with a grudging fascination. "Ridiculous," she muttered, but she flipped her notebook to a fresh page and wrote, 8:30 a.m., Scout follows mail truck. Same pace, same distance, no barking. The neighborhood had taken to Scout's ritual like it was the local entertainment. Across the street, Mrs. Larson set her pruning shears down and cupped her hands around her mouth. "Go get 'em, Scout," she called, her laugh carrying over the quiet street. Timmy, who'd parked his bike against a mailbox, pumped his fist in the air. "He's the fastest postman ever!" he shouted, earning a honk from Clara's horn. Even old Mr. Callahan, who rarely left his recliner by the window, cracked his curtains to watch, his weathered face softening into a smile. Ellen's pen paused. She didn't want to admit it, but there was something oddly comforting about the scene, like a small piece of the world had clicked into place. Scout's routine was as predictable as the sunrise. Every morning, Monday through Saturday, He appeared from the direction of the old oak grove at the end of Willow Creek Lane, his origins as mysterious as his purpose. He'd follow Clara's truck through the entire route, past the Johnsons' blue ranch house, the Parkers' sagging porch, the empty lot where the kids played kickball, never straying, never barking, just trotting along with those bright, focused eyes. Rain didn't deter him. Ellen had seen him shake off a downpour like it was nothing, his fur plastered to his tiny frame but his stride unbroken. Shine didn't slow him either. He'd pant, but never lag. Clara had told Ellen last week, half joking, "He knows my stops better than I do. Skips the houses with no mail, can you believe it?" Ellen hadn't believed it, not really, but she'd started watching more closely, her notebook filling with details she told herself were just for record-keeping. Tuesday, 8:45 a.m., Scout pauses at Larson's mailbox, moves on when Clara does. Thursday, 9:02 a.m., ignores Squirrel, stays on truck's tail. Clara's truck rolled past Ellen's house now, and she raised a hand in a half-wave, more out of habit than friendliness. Clara grinned, leaning out the window. "Morning, Ellen. Your guard dog's on duty," she called, nodding toward Scout, who was prancing along the sidewalk, his white eye patch catching the sunlight. Ellen's lips twitched, but she didn't reply. Guard dog? Hardly. Scout was no protector, he was a puzzle, a tiny anomaly in her orderly world. Still, she couldn't deny the way the neighborhood seemed to light up when he passed. Mrs. Larson was chatting with Timmy's mom now, pointing at Scout and laughing. 2 houses down, the Henderson twins were out, snapping pictures with their phones, probably for one of those social media things Ellen didn't understand. The whole street felt alive, and Scout, all 10 pounds of him, was at the center of it. Ellen's pen tapped against her notebook. She lived here long enough to know Willow Creek Lane wasn't perfect. There were feuds over property lines, whispers about who wasn't keeping up their yard, and the kind of small-town gossip that could cut if you let it. But Scout's daily march seemed to smooth those edges, if only for a moment. People stopped, to watch, to talk, to share a laugh. Even Ellen, who'd spent the last 5 years building walls around her heart, found herself lingering on the porch longer than necessary, her coffee forgotten as she tracked the puppy's path. She told herself it was vigilance, someone had to keep an eye on things, but deep down she knew it was something else. Scout was getting under her skin, and she wasn't sure she liked it. The mail truck turned onto Cedar Street, and Scout followed, his little form disappearing around the corner. Ellen closed her notebook, her fingers lingering on the cover. She glanced at the spot on her lawn where Scout had sat, the grass slightly flattened, and felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: anticipation. Tomorrow he'd be back, and she'd be here watching, writing, wondering. For now, though, the street was quiet again, the spell of Scout's presence fading into the ordinary rhythm of the day. Ellen stood, brushing off her sweater, and carried her cold coffee inside, already counting the hours until 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. The days slipped into a gentle rhythm on Willow Creek Lane, each morning marked by the now familiar sight of Scout, the scruffy puppy, trailing Clara's mail truck with his unwavering dedication. Ellen Harper, despite her best efforts to remain detached, found herself settling into her porch chair a little earlier each day, her notebook open and her coffee steaming as she waited for the puppy's appearance. It was October now, and the air carried the scent of fallen leaves, the trees along the street ablaze with reds and golds. Scout's routine had become a cornerstone of the neighborhood's pulse, a small but steady thread weaving through the lives of its residents. Ellen's journal was filling up with observations. October 3rd, 8:31 a.m. Scout skips Parker's house, no mail today. October 5th, 8:47 a.m. Pauses to sniff Mrs. Larson's chrysanthemums, catches up in 10 seconds. She told herself it was just a habit, a way to keep her mind sharp. But the truth was, Scout's presence had sparked a curiosity she hadn't felt in years. This morning, though, something was off. Ellen glanced at her watch, 8:35 a.m., and frowned. Clara's truck had rumbled by 5 minutes ago, its engine fading now as it turned onto Cedar Street, but Scout was nowhere to be seen. Ellen leaned forward in her chair, her eyes scanning the oak grove at the end of Willow Creek Lane, where Scout always emerged like clockwork. The street was quiet, save for the rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement and the distant hum of a lawnmower. Mrs. Larson was out, sweeping. Her porch and even she paused, glancing up the road with a puzzled expression. Timmy, perched on his bike, circled the sidewalk. His usual excitement dimmed. "Where's Scout?" he called to Ellen, his voice carrying a note of worry. Ellen's grip tightened on her notebook. "Probably chasing a squirrel," she replied, but her tone lacked conviction. Scout didn't chase squirrels. He didn't chase anything except Clara's truck, and even then, it was with a calm, almost professional focus. Her heart gave an unexpected lurch. A flicker of concern she quickly tamped down. He was just a stray, she reminded herself. Strays wandered off. It wasn't her problem. Clara's truck looped back down Willow Creek Lane, finishing its route. As she pulled up to Ellen's mailbox, she leaned out the window, her freckled face creased with unease. "No Scout today," she said, her voice light but her eyes searching. "First time he's missed a run, hope he's okay." Ellen managed a shrug, though her chest felt oddly tight. He's probably fine. Puppies get distracted. But Clara's frown lingered, and as the truck pulled away, Ellen noticed her glancing in the rearview mirror as if expecting Scout to appear at the last second. The neighborhood felt strangely hollow without the puppy's presence. Mrs. Larson went back to sweeping, but her movements were slower, distracted. Timmy pedaled off, his usual chatter absent. Ellen opened her notebook, but her pen hovered unmoving. She wrote, October 7th, 8:35 a.m. Scout absent. Mail truck passed without him. The words looked stark on the page, like a missing heartbeat. Noon the absence had rippled further. Mrs. Larson stopped by Ellen's porch, her hands twisting in her apron. "It's not like him, Ellen. You think he's hurt? Or maybe someone took him." Her voice trembled, and Ellen, who'd always found Mrs. Larson's fussiness irritating, felt a pang of sympathy. "He'll turn up," Ellen said, but the words felt hollow. She stood, brushing off her sweater. "I'll take a walk, see if I spot him." The offer surprised her as much as it did Mrs. Larson, whose eyes widened before softening into gratitude. "Thank you, Ellen. That's kind of you." Ellen waved. Ate off, grabbing her jacket and stepping onto the sidewalk. She told herself she was just stretching her legs, not searching for some scruffy mutt. But as she walked toward the oak grove, her eyes scanned the underbrush, the ditches, the shadows between the trees. No sign of Scout. The grove was quiet, the air thick with the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves. She called his name once, softly, Scout, and felt foolish when only silence answered. She looped back through the neighborhood, passing the Johnsons' house, the Parkers' porch, the empty lot. Neighbors were out now more than usual for a weekday afternoon, their conversations hushed. "Seen the puppy?" someone asked. "Not since yesterday," another replied. Ellen's steps slowed. She hadn't realized how much Scout's daily ritual had woven itself into their lives, a small but steady anchor in the ebb and flow of the day. By late afternoon, Ellen was back on her porch, her legs aching and her notebook untouched. The sky had turned grey, promising rain. She was about to head inside when a faint tap-tap-tap caught her ear, the sound of tiny paws on pavement. Her head snapped up, and there he was, Scout, emerging from between two houses, his fur matted and his left hind leg dragging slightly. In his mouth he carried something small and tattered, a faded blue ribbon frayed at the edges, glinting faintly in the dim light. Ellen's breath caught. She stood, her heart pounding as Scout limped toward her lawn and dropped the ribbon at the base of her porch steps. He looked up at her, his white-patched eye weary but bright, and let out a soft whimper. Ellen knelt, ignoring the creak in her knees, and picked up the ribbon. It was worn but distinct, embroidered with a tiny gold emblem that looked like a postal insignia, the kind she'd seen on old uniforms. "Scout, where'd you get this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The puppy tilted his head, then sank onto the grass, his small body trembling with exhaustion. Ellen's fingers brushed his fur, and she noticed the scar above his left paw, more visible now, a thin pink line against his matted coat. Clara's truck was long gone, but Ellen knew she'd want to see this. She scooped Scout up, surprised, at how light he was, and carried him to her porch, wrapping him in an old towel. He didn't resist, just nestled against her, his warmth seeping through the fabric. She grabbed her phone and texted Clara. Found Scout. He's okay but limping. Brought something strange, blue ribbon, postal emblem. Clara's reply came fast. On my way. As Ellen waited, she studied the ribbon, turning it over in her hands. It felt like a clue, a piece of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. Scout's eyes followed her, calm but knowing, as if he'd done his part and was waiting for her to catch up. The neighborhood was stirring again, Mrs. Larson's voice calling out, Timmy's bike squeaking as he raced over. Scout's return was news, but the ribbon and the mystery it carried felt like something bigger, something that might unravel the enigma of the puppy who'd claimed their street, and, somehow, their hearts. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across Willow Creek Lane, the grey sky heavy with the promise of rain. Ellen Harper sat on her porch, the tattered blue ribbon resting on the wicker table beside her, its faint gold postal emblem catching the dim glow. Scout, the scruffy puppy, was curled up in the towel on her lap, his breathing steady but his small body still trembling faintly from his earlier ordeal. Ellen's fingers absently stroked his fur, her mind racing despite her efforts to stay. Grounded. The ribbon felt like a message, one she didn't yet understand, and Scout's soulful eyes, watching her with that uncanny calm, only deepened the mystery. Where had he been? And why had he brought this relic to her? Clara's mail truck pulled up with a squeak of brakes, and she hopped out, her auburn ponytail swinging as she jogged toward the porch. "He okay?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. She crouched beside Scout, who lifted his head and gave her hand a weak lick. "Seems to be," Ellen said, her tone clipped but softer than usual. "Just tired, I think. Vet might need to check that limp, though." She gestured to the ribbon. "This is what he had. Mean anything to you?" Clara picked up the ribbon, turning it over in her hands. Her brow furrowed, and she let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be. Looks like part of an old postal cap, the kind they used back in the 90s or early 2000s. My dad wore one like it when he was a carrier." She glanced at Scout, then back at Ellen. "Where'd he find this? He was gone all day." Ellen shook her head. "Came limping out from between the Callahans and Parker's houses, like he'd been on some grand adventure. Dropped it right at my steps." She paused, feeling foolish for what she was about to say. "Almost like he meant for me to have it." Clara's eyes softened, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. "He's got a way of doing that, doesn't he? Making you feel like he's got a plan." She sat on the porch steps, still holding the ribbon. "Mind if I take a closer look at him? Something's nagging at me." Ellen nodded, shifting Scout gently so Clara could see him better. Clara's fingers brushed over the scar above his left paw, and her expression shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "This scar, I've seen it before. Or something like it." She hesitated, then looked at Ellen. "When I was a kid, maybe 10, my mom got me a puppy from the shelter. Named him Pip. He had a scar just like this, same spot. Used to follow my dad's mail route sometimes before Dad switched to a desk job. They said Pip had belonged to another carrier who didn't make it." Ellen's stomach tightened. "Didn't make it?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded, her gaze distant. "Yeah. There was a story at the post office, more like a legend. A carrier named Margaret Cole worked this route back in 2003. Got caught. In a bad storm, tree fell, took out her truck. They found her puppy Pip sitting by her, unharmed but howling like his heart was broken. Shelter took him in after. That's where we got him." Ellen's mind raced, piecing together fragments. Scout's scar, his obsession with the mail truck, the ribbon with its postal emblem. It couldn't be a coincidence. But Pip would be over 20 years old now, far too old for a dog, let alone a puppy. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. "That's impossible," she said more to herself than to Clara. "Dogs don't live that long." Clara shrugged, but her eyes stayed on Scout. "I know. But this little guy, he's different. You've seen him. He's not just chasing the truck for fun. It's like he's looking for something or someone." The weight of Clara's words settled over Ellen, stirring a mix of disbelief and wonder. She'd always been practical. The kind of woman who trusted facts over feelings, but Scout was challenging that. She glanced at the ribbon, then at the puppy, who was now dozing in her lap, his white-patched eye hidden beneath a flop of fur. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice quieter than she meant it to be. Clara stood, pocketing the ribbon. "I'll take this to the post office tomorrow. See if anyone remembers anything about Margaret or her gear. Maybe there's a record. You keep an eye on him, okay? And maybe—" She hesitated, a playful glint in her eye. "Maybe don't shoo him off your lawn just yet." Ellen snorted, but there was no venom in it. "I'll think about it," she said, though she already knew Scout wasn't going anywhere. Clara waved and headed back to her truck, leaving Ellen alone with the sleeping puppy and a growing sense that she was being pulled into something bigger than herself. That night, after settling Scout on a folded blanket in her laundry room with a bowl of water and some leftover chicken, Ellen couldn't sleep. The ribbon sat on her kitchen table, a silent challenge. She poured a glass of milk and opened her laptop, something she rarely used except to check email or order seeds for her garden. Her fingers hesitated over the keys, then typed, "Margaret Cole, Jefferson City, MO 2003. The search results loaded slowly, but when they did, her breath caught. A grainy article from the Jefferson City Tribune, dated March 14, 2003, filled the screen. Local mail carrier dies in storm-related accident. The photo showed a woman in her 40s, smiling in a postal uniform, her hair tucked under a cap like the one the ribbon might have come from. The article detailed the tragedy. Margaret Cole, a beloved carrier on the Willow Creek route, had been killed when a tree fell on her truck during a freak storm. Her puppy, described as a small brown mutt with a white patch, was found beside her, unharmed but distressed. No family could take the dog, so he was sent to the county shelter. The article ended with a quote from a co-worker. Margaret loved that puppy, called him her little shadow. Wherever she went, he followed. Ellen's hands trembled as she closed the laptop. She glanced toward the laundry room, where Scout's soft snores drifted through the door. It didn't add up. Scout couldn't be Pip, not after all these years, but the scar, the ribbon, the way he followed Clara's truck with such purpose, it was too much to dismiss. She picked up her notebook and wrote, October 7th, 10:45 p.m., found article on Margaret Cole. Scout's scar matches Pip's, ribbon from her cap. Need to know more. The next morning, Ellen woke early, her mind still churning. Scout was already up, sitting by the front door, his tail wagging as if he knew the mail truck would be by soon. Ellen opened the door, and he trotted out, his limp barely noticeable now. She followed at a distance, her notebook tucked under her arm, determined to unravel the mystery of the puppy who seemed to carry a piece of the past in his tiny paws. The morning sun broke through the grey clouds over Willow Creek Lane, casting a warm glow on the dew-damp grass. Ellen Harper stepped out onto her porch, her coffee mug steaming in the cool October air, her notebook tucked under her arm. Scout, the scruffy puppy with the white-patched eye, was already waiting at the edge of her lawn, his stubby tail wagging as he watched the street for Clara's mail truck. The limp from yesterday was gone, replaced by his usual eager energy, but Ellen couldn't shake the weight of what she learned last night. The article about Margaret Cole, the postal carrier who died in 2003, and her puppy Pip, haunted her thoughts. Scout's scar, the tattered blue ribbon, his uncanny dedication to the mail route, it all pointed to a connection that defied logic. Yet, as she watched him now, prancing in place as Clara's truck rumbled into view, Ellen felt a shift inside her, a flicker of purpose she hadn't known she'd been missing. Clara waved from the truck, her grin wide as she spotted Scout falling into step behind her. "Back in action, I see," she called to Ellen, who managed to nod, her eyes fixed on the puppy. Ellen set her mug down and slipped her notebook open, jotting, October 8th, 8:30 a.m. Scout follows truck, no limp. Seems normal, but ribbon and article still on my mind. She hesitated, then added, going to follow him today. The decision surprised hers. She wasn't one for chasing whims, but Scout's mystery had taken root and she needed answers. Ellen grabbed her jacket and trailed the mail truck at a distance, keeping Scout in sight as he trotted along the sidewalk, his tiny form a blur of brown and white. The neighborhood was waking up, Mrs. Larson waved from her porch, Timmy zoomed by on his bike, and the Henderson twins snapped photos from their front yard. Scout ignored the distractions, his focus laser-sharp on Clara's truck. Ellen's legs ached as she kept pace, but she pressed on, her curiosity outweighing her usual caution. They passed the Johnsons' blue ranch house, the Parkers' sagging porch, and the empty lot where kids played. At each stop, Scout paused, waiting patiently as Clara delivered mail, then moved on when she did. It was methodical, almost reverent, like he was honoring a ritual. But when they reached Maple Drive, something changed. Instead of following the truck to the next house, Scout veered off, his little legs carrying him toward an old, weathered bungalow at the end of the street. The house was a relic, its paint peeling and its windows boarded up, abandoned since the Thompsons moved away 3 years ago. Ellen slowed, her breath catching as Scout stopped at the porch steps and sat, staring at the front door. His tail was still his eyes fixed, as if he could see something or someone through the splintered wood. Ellen's notebook trembled in her hands as she wrote, 8:52 a.m., Scout stops at empty house on Maple. Never done this before. Clara noticed too, pulling the truck over and stepping out. What's he up to? She called, jogging over to Ellen. Before Ellen could answer, a faint flicker of light glowed behind one of the boarded windows, yellow and steady, like a candle. Ellen froze. The house was supposed to be empty. Everyone said so. She exchanged a glance with Clara, whose easy smile had faded. Is someone in there? Clara whispered, her hand resting on the truck's door. Ellen's heart pounded. But she forced her voice to stay steady. Only one way to find out. She stepped forward, Scout's calm presence anchoring her, and called out, Hello, anyone home? Her words hung in the air unanswered. Scout let out a soft whine, his first sound of the morning, and padded up the porch steps, nudging the door with his nose. Clara followed, her boots creaking on the warped wood. Hello? She tried again, louder this time. A shuffle came from inside, then the slow groan of hinges. The door opened a crack, revealing a frail woman with white hair and deep-set eyes, dressed in a faded cardigan. She squinted at Clara, then at Scout, her expression shifting from confusion to something softer, almost hopeful. Margaret? The woman rasped, her voice barely audible. Is that you? Ellen's breath caught. Clara shook her head gently. No, ma'am. I'm Clara, the mail carrier. This is Scout. Are you okay? The woman's gaze dropped to the puppy who had stepped forward and was now pressing his small body against her leg, his tail wagging slowly. Pip, she whispered, her hand trembling. As she reached down to touch him, Scout nuzzled her palm and a tear slipped down her weathered cheek. You found me. Ellen stepped closer, her notebook forgotten. Ma'am, do you live here? Do you need help? Her voice was softer now, the skepticism she'd clung to unraveling in the face of this moment. The woman looked up, her eyes clearing. I'm Ruth Cole. This used to be my sister's house, Margaret's. I came back after the hospital let me go, no one to take me in, so I've been staying quiet. She paused, stroking Scout's fur. Margaret had a puppy like this, followed her everywhere. When she died, they said he was gone too, but here he is. Clara's eyes widened, and she glanced at Ellen, the ribbon from yesterday clearly on her mind. Ellen's thoughts raced. Ruth was Margaret's sister, and Scout impossibly seemed to be Pip, the puppy from the article. But how? And why had he led them here? She knelt beside Scout, her hand brushing his scar. Ruth, she said carefully, how long have you been here alone? Ruth's gaze drifted to the house. A few weeks, didn't want to bother anyone, but he knew. She looked at Scout, her voice breaking. He remembered. The weight of Ruth's words settled over them, heavy and warm. Scout had been retracing Margaret's route, not just out of habit, but to find her sister, the family he'd lost 20 years ago. Ellen's chest tightened, a mix of awe and disbelief. She'd spent years keeping the world at arm's length, but this tiny puppy was pulling her back into it step by step. Clara cleared her throat, her voice gentle. Ruth, let's get you some help, okay? Food, a proper place to stay. Scout brought us to you, and we're not leaving you alone now. Ruth nodded, her hand still on Scout's head. and Ellen felt a surge of purpose she hadn't known she could still feel. As Clara called a neighbor to bring blankets and a hot meal, Ellen looked down at Scout, who was watching her with those steady, knowing eyes. "Your trouble," she whispered. But there was no bite in it, only a quiet gratitude. Scout had done more than follow a mail truck. He'd delivered them to someone who needed them. And in doing so, he was starting to mend something in Ellen, too. The afternoon sun dipped low over Willow Creek Lane, painting the peeling bungalow. On Maple Drive in hues of amber and rose. Ellen Harper stood on the porch of the house that had once belonged to Margaret Cole, her notebook tucked away for the first time all day. Scout, the scruffy puppy with the white-patched eye, sat at her feet, his small body pressed against Ruth Cole's leg, as the elderly woman leaned against the doorframe, her eyes still glistening from the reunion. Clara, the mail carrier, was, on her phone, coordinating with Mrs. Larson to bring over a hot meal and blankets. The air buzzed with a quiet energy, the kind that comes when a community senses something extraordinary has just begun. Ellen's mind was still reeling from Ruth's revelation that Scout impossibly seemed to be Pip, the puppy who had belonged to her sister Margaret 20 years ago. The math didn't add up, but the truth was in Ruth's trembling hand on Scout's fur, in the way Scout had led them straight to this forgotten house. Ellen, who had spent years guarding her heart against surprises, felt that guard crumbling, replaced by a warmth she hadn't known she could still feel. Scout wasn't just a stray, he was a bridge, and he'd brought them to someone who needed them. Mrs. Larson arrived first, her arms laden with a foil-covered casserole dish and a quilt draped over her shoulder. "Oh, Ruth, you poor dear," she said, bustling up the steps. "Why didn't you tell us you were here?" She set the dish on the porch railing and wrapped Ruth in a hug, ignoring the older woman's weak protests. Scout's tail wagged as if approving the gesture. "I didn't want to be a bother," Ruth murmured, but her voice softened under Mrs. Larson's kindness. Ellen caught her eye and offered a small nod, a silent promise that she wasn't alone anymore. Timmy and his mom arrived next, Timmy clutching a thermos of soup and his mom carrying a bag of groceries. "Scout found you," Timmy exclaimed, dropping to his knees to pet the puppy. "He's like a superhero." Ruth managed a faint smile, her hand never leaving Scout's head. Ellen stepped back, watching the scene unfold. The neighborhood, usually content with polite waves and small talk, was coming alive in a way she hadn't seen since the block parties of her early years here. The Henderson twins showed up with a battery-powered lantern, their usual teenage aloofness replaced by eager chatter. "We heard Scout did something amazing," one of them said, setting the lantern on the porch. "Is it true he found someone?" "It's true," Clara said, pocketing her phone. "And we're gonna make sure Ruth's taken care of." She glanced at Ellen, a spark of determination in her eyes. "Right?" Ellen hesitated, her old instinct to stay on the sidelines flaring up. But then she looked at Scout, his bright eyes meeting hers, and felt a tug in her chest. "Right," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "I'll start a schedule. Meals, check-ins, whatever Ruth needs until we get her settled properly." Clara's grin widened. "That's the spirit. Scout's got us all working together. Now." By evening, the porch was crowded with neighbors. Mr. Callahan, who rarely left his house, shuffled over with a thermos of coffee. The Parkers brought a space heater, and even the Johnsons, known for keeping to themselves, dropped off a basket of apples from their tree. Ruth, overwhelmed but visibly comforted, sat in a chair someone had dragged out, Scout curled up at her feet. Ellen stood at the edge of the group, her notebook still in her pocket, her hands busy passing out plates of Mrs. Larson's casserole. She'd always thought of Willow Creek Lane as a place where people coexisted, not connected, but tonight it felt different, like a family stitched together by a puppy's quiet mission. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Clara pulled Ellen aside. "I checked with the post office," she whispered, holding up the blue ribbon from yesterday. "They confirmed it's from one of Margaret's old caps. And get this, they found a record of Pip being adopted out from the shelter in 2003, but he vanished a few years later. No trace until now." She shook her head, glancing at Scout. "I don't know how he's here, Ellen, but he's doing something special." Ellen nodded, her throat tight. "He's not just following your truck anymore," she said softly. He's finding people, like Ruth. Clara's eyes glistened. Yeah, and maybe he's finding us too. The crowd began to disperse, neighbors, promising to return tomorrow with more supplies and ideas for helping Ruth. Ellen lingered, helping Ruth inside and setting up the space heater in the cramped living room. Ruth clutched her hand before she left. Thank you, she said, her voice stronger now. I thought I'd be alone forever, but Pip, Scout, he knew where to go. Ellen squeezed her hand, a lump in her throat. He's good at that, she said, and for the first time she meant it without reservation. Back home, Ellen sat at her kitchen table, her notebook open to a new page. She wrote, October 8th, 7:45 p.m., Scout led us to Ruth Cole, Margaret's sister. Neighborhood brought food, blankets, company. Ruth not alone anymore. She paused, then added, Scout's not just a puppy, he's changing us. The words felt true, almost sacred, and as she closed the notebook, she heard Scout's soft pause at the back door. She let him in, and he curled up on the blanket in the laundry room, his eyes half closed but still watching her, as if to say, We're not done yet. Chapter. Next morning, Scout was up at dawn waiting by the front door for Clara's truck. Ellen followed him again, this time with less hesitation, her heart open to whatever he might show her next. As he trotted behind the truck, she noticed neighbors waving, not just at Clara but at Scout, their faces lit with a new kind of hope. Scout had become their hero, a tiny beacon of connection in a world that often felt too big and too cold, and Ellen, who had once held a broom to shoo him away, was starting to believe he might be hers too. The crisp October days deepened in Jefferson City, the leaves on Willow Creek Lane piling into rust-colored drifts along the sidewalks. Ellen Harper's mornings had taken on a new cadence, one shaped by the quiet anticipation of Scout's daily ritual. The scruffy puppy with the white-patched eye was no longer just a curiosity. He was a cornerstone of the neighborhood, a small but mighty force pulling people together. Ellen's notebook, once a record of skepticism, now brimmed with notes of wonder. October 10th, 8:33 a.m., Scout leads truck as usual, neighbors wave. October 12th, 9:01 a.m., stops to let Timmy pet him, then back to route. Each entry felt like a breadcrumb in a trail she was only beginning to understand, one that led not just to Ruth Cole, but to something bigger, a purpose woven into Scout's every step. Since finding Ruth, the neighborhood had transformed. Ellen had organized a schedule for Ruth's care, with neighbors signing up to deliver meals, clean or simply sit and chat. Mrs. Larson baked cornbread every Tuesday, Timmy's mom handled laundry, and even Mr. Callahan, with his creaky knees, stopped by to share stories of old Jefferson City. Ruth's bungalow, once a shadow of neglect, now glowed with life, its porch lined with potted mums donated by the Parkers. Scout, ever the quiet guardian, often curled up at Ruth's feet during these visits, his presence a steady comfort. Ellen, who had spent years avoiding entanglements, found herself at the heart of this effort, coordinating with a warmth that surprised her. She told herself it was practical, someone had to keep things orderly, but deep down she knew Scout had sparked something in her, a desire to connect that she'd buried since Tom's death. This morning, Ellen sat on her porch, coffee in hand, watching Scout trot behind Clara's mail truck with his usual focus. The neighborhood buzzed with its familiar rhythm, Mrs. Larson watering her flowers, Timmy racing his bike, the Henderson twins snapping photos. But as Clara's truck paused at the Johnsons' mailbox, Scout did something new. Instead of waiting for her to move on, he veered off the sidewalk, his tiny legs carrying him to the front yard of the old Miller house, a squat, faded bungalow where Mr. Miller, a widower in his 80s, lived alone. Scout sat on the cracked walkway, staring at the door, his tail still but his ears tilted forward, as if listening for something only he could hear. Ellen's pen froze over her notebook. She wrote, October 15th, 8:47 a.m. Scout stops at Miller's house. Not on mail route today. Why? She stood, her curiosity overriding her usual reserve, and walked toward the house, keeping her distance but close enough to see. Clara noticed too, pulling the truck over and joining Ellen on the sidewalk. What's he up to now? she asked, her voice a mix of amusement and awe. No idea, Ellen said, but her eyes stayed on Scout. The puppy hadn't moved, his gaze fixed on the door. The Miller house was quiet, its curtains drawn, the yard overgrown with weeds. Mr. Miller was a recluse, known for his gruff demeanor and rare appearances. Ellen had seen him only a handful of times, usually retrieving his mail with a scowl. Yet Scout sat there, patient as a sentinel, as if he knew something the rest of them didn't. After a few minutes, the door creaked open, and Mr. Miller appeared. His thin frame stooped, his flannel shirt rumpled. "What's this?" he grumbled, squinting at Scout. "Get off my property, mutt." But Scout didn't flinch. He tilted his head, letting out a soft whine, and took a single step closer. Mr. Miller's scowl faltered, and he leaned on his cane, studying the puppy. "You're that mail dog, aren't you? What do you want with me?" Ellen and Clara exchanged a glance. "Maybe he just wants to say hi," Clara called, her tone light but careful. Mr. Miller grunted, but he didn't shut the door. Instead, he shuffled onto the porch, lowering himself into a rickety chair. Scout padded forward and sat at his feet, resting his chin on Mr. Miller's worn boot. The old man froze, then slowly reached down, his hand trembling as he touched Scout's fur. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, his voice thick. "Haven't had a dog around since my Sally passed." Ellen's chest tightened. She remembered. Sally, Mr. Miller's wife, who had died a decade ago. The neighborhood had tried to rally then, but Mr. Miller had pushed everyone away, retreating into his grief. Now Scout's quiet presence seemed to crack that shell, if only a little. Ellen stepped closer, her voice soft. "He's been doing this lately, Mr. Miller, showing up where he's needed. Like with Ruth Cole." Mr. Miller's eyes flicked to her, sharp but curious. "Heard about that, thought it was just talk." He looked down at Scout, who was gazing up at him with those steady caramel eyes. "You're a strange one, aren't you?" After a long pause, he added, "Suppose you can stay a bit. But don't expect treats," Clara chuckled, and Ellen felt a smile tug at her lips. They left Scout there, trusting he'd find his way back, and as they walked to the truck, Clara said, "He's at it again, isn't he? Finding people who need him." Ellen nodded, her mind racing. Over the next few days, Scout's new mission became clear. He still followed Clara's truck most mornings, but now he made deliberate detours, stopping at houses where the occupants were struggling in quiet ways. One day, it was the young couple on Cedar Street, the Wilsons, who'd been keeping to themselves since a miscarriage. Scout sat on their porch until Mrs. Wilson opened the door, her eyes red but softening at the sight of him. Another day, he lingered at the apartment of Mia, a shy teenager who rarely spoke to anyone. Mia ended up sitting with him for an hour, sketching him in her notebook, her usual guarded expression replaced by a tentative smile. Each visit sparked something. The Wilsons started joining neighbors for coffee. Mia showed her sketches to Timmy, who declared her the best artist ever. Ellen's notebook filled with these moments. October 17th, 9:12 a.m., Scout at Wilson's. Mrs. W. cried, then invited Mrs. Larson over. October 19th, 8:55 a.m., Scout with Mia. She talked to him. First time I've seen her smile. She wrote late. One night, her kitchen lit by a single lamp. He's not just following the mail truck, he's delivering us to each other. The neighborhood began to notice, too. People started checking on each other, inspired by Scout's quiet nudges. Mrs. Larson organized a potluck, the first in years, and Mr. Miller showed up, grumbling but eating 2 helpings of pie. Ellen found herself at the center of it all. No longer the skeptical observer but a participant, her heart opening to the community she'd kept at arm's length. Scout, with his wagging tail and knowing eyes, was rewriting the story of Willow Creek Lane one visit at a time. The October days grew shorter in Jefferson City, the evenings wrapping Willow Creek Lane in a soft, golden chill. Ellen Harper's porch had become a command post of sorts, her notebook now a chronicle of Scout's quiet miracles. The scruffy puppy with the white-patched eye was no longer just the neighborhood's mascot. He was its heartbeat, his daily detours to lonely doorsteps sparking connections that rippled through the community. Ellen's skepticism had all but melted, replaced by a quiet awe at how a creature so small could carry such purpose. Her latest entry read, October 22nd, 8:49 a.m., Scout at Mrs. Carter's. She's been alone since her son moved away. Talked to Clara for 20 minutes after. Progress. She closed the notebook, her coffee warm in her hands, and watched Scout trot behind Clara's mail truck, his stubby tail wagging like a metronome. But today his path would lead to someone new, and Ellen would find herself drawn deeper into the puppy's mission. The morning was crisp, the air scented with wood smoke and fallen leaves. Scout followed Clara's truck as usual, but when they reached the park at the end of Willow Creek Lane, a small patch of green with a rusty slide and a few benches, he broke from his routine. Instead of trailing the truck to the next street, he veered toward a bench where a boy sat alone, his knees pulled to his chest. The boy, no older than 8, had dark hair that fell into his eyes and a faded red hoodie that looked a size too big. Ellen, who had taken to walking a few paces behind Scout to observe his detours, slowed her steps, her notebook open, but her pen still. She recognized the boy vaguely. Leo, who lived with his aunt in the yellow duplex on Cedar Street, was a quiet kid, always on the fringes, his eyes downcast as if the world were too loud for him. Scout didn't hesitate. He padded across the grass, his tiny paws leaving faint prints in the dew, and sat at Leo's feet, his white-patched eye tilted up with that familiar, steady gaze. Leo startled, his sneakers scuffing the bench as he looked down. "Oh," he said softly, his voice barely carrying. "Hi." Scout let out a gentle huff, his tail giving a single wag, and settled closer, resting his chin on the edge of the bench. Leo's shoulders, hunched tight, seemed to loosen, and he slid to the ground, sitting cross-legged in the grass. His small hands reached out, hesitating, then buried themselves in Scout's scruffy fur. "You're the male puppy, aren't you?" he whispered. Scout's ears twitched as if agreeing. Ellen stayed back, leaning against a tree to give them space. Her notebook remained open, but she didn't write, too caught by the scene unfolding. Leo's face, usually guarded, softened as he stroked Scout's back, his fingers tracing the scar above the puppy's paw. "I'm not supposed to be here," he said, his voice so low Ellen almost missed it. "Aunt Jen thinks I'm at school, but I didn't want to go. Kids are mean sometimes." Scout tilted his head, letting out a soft whine, and Leo's lips twitched in a faint smile. "You get it, don't you? You're not mean." Ellen's chest tightened. She remembered whispers about Leo's situation, his parents gone, one to prison, the other lost to addiction, leaving him with his aunt, Jen, who worked long hours at the diner. Jen tried, but Leo often seemed adrift, a shadow slipping through the neighborhood. Yet here was Scout, finding him in his quiet pain, offering nothing but presence. Ellen scribbled, October 24th, 9:05 a.m., Scout at park with Leo. Boy alone, talking to him. Scout just listens. Clara's truck had moved on, but Ellen texted her. Scout's with a kid at the park. Leo from Cedar St. might need to check on him. Clara replied instantly. Got it. I'll swing by after my route. Ellen pocketed her phone, her eyes never leaving Leo and Scout. The boy was talking now, a steady stream of words tumbling out, about school, about missing his mom, about how his aunt's house smelled like bleach and never felt like home. Scout lay beside him, his small body a warm anchor, his eyes fixed on Leo as if every word mattered. Ellen marveled at it, the puppy's ability to listen without judgment, to make a frightened child feel seen. After a while, Leo pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, unfolding it to reveal a pencil sketch of a dog that looked remarkably like Scout, complete with the white patch and scar. "I drew this last week," he said, holding it out. "Saw you with the mail lady. You're brave going everywhere like that." Scout sniffed the paper, his tail wagging, and Leo laughed, a small, bright sound that cut through the morning chill. Ellen's throat tightened. She hadn't heard Leo laugh before, not in all the times she'd seen him slinking past her porch. Clara arrived 20 minutes later, her truck idling as she approached. "Hey, Leo," she said gently, crouching beside him. "You okay, buddy?" Leo's smile faded, but he nodded, clutching his sketch. "Scout's keeping you company, huh? He's good at that." She glanced at Ellen, who gave a subtle nod, signaling they'd need to call Jen. Clara turned back to Leo. "How about we get you home? Scout can come too if you want." Leo hesitated, then nodded again, tucking his sketch into his pocket. Scout stood, nudging Leo's hand with his nose, and the boy managed another small smile. Ellen followed as they walked to the duplex, Scout trotting beside Leo like a loyal shadow. Jen was at the door when they arrived, her face a mix of relief and worry. "Leo, you scared me half to death," she said, pulling him into a hug. She looked at Ellen and Clara, her eyes grateful. "Thank you. And is that the puppy everyone's talking about?" "That's Scout," Ellen said, her voice warm. "He's got a knack for finding people who need him." Jen knelt, scratching Scout's ears. "Well, thank you, Scout. You're welcome here any time." Leo's face lit up and he whispered something to Scout, too quiet for Ellen to hear. Over the next few days, Leo became Scout's shadow. He joined the puppy's morning walks, his backpack bouncing as he kept pace with Clara's truck. Scout seemed to welcome the company, pausing, to let Leo catch up or nudging him playfully when they passed the park. Leo's sketches multiplied, each one of Scout in different poses, running, sitting, sleeping under a tree. One afternoon, he showed up at Ruth's bungalow, where Scout was resting on the porch. "Can I read you something?" he asked Ruth, his voice shy but eager. Ruth, her face brighter since the neighborhood's support, nodded, and Leo pulled out a story he'd written about Scout, the bravest puppy ever, who found lost people and made them smile. Ruth's eyes glistened and she clapped when he finished, calling him a fine writer. Ellen watched it all, her notebook filling with moments that felt like gifts. October 27th, 3:15 p.m. Leo reads to Ruth. Scout lies between them, tail wagging. She wrote late one night, "Scout's not just connecting us, he's giving us hope, especially kids like Leo." The puppy was weaving a new thread into Willow Creek Lane, one that tied the young and old, the lonely and the lost, into something stronger, something whole. The late October air in Jefferson City carried a hint of winter's approach, the mornings sharp with frost that clung to the lawns of Willow Creek Lane. Ellen Harper's porch remained her vantage point, but it was no longer a solitary perch. Neighbors now lingered there, dropping off muffins or swapping stories about Scout, the scruffy puppy whose quiet presence had rewoven the fabric of their community. Ellen's notebook, once a private ledger of suspicion, was now a tapestry of connection, its pages filled with moments that felt like small miracles. October 28th, 8:42 a.m., Scout at the Wilsons. They joined the potluck. October 30th, 4:10 p.m., Leo shows Mia his Scout drawings. She laughs. Each entry was a testament to the puppy's gift for finding those who needed him most. And Ellen, once a bystander, was now a keeper of his story. Her heart opened to the neighborhood in ways she hadn't thought possible. Scout's detours had become the talk of Willow Creek Lane, his visits to lonely doorsteps sparking a wave of kindness that refused to ebb. The neighborhood, once content with polite distance, was alive with new energy. Mrs. Larson's potluck had drawn dozens, with even Mr. Miller staying past dessert, his gruff exterior softened by Scout's persistent charm. The Wilsons, who had kept to themselves after their loss, now hosted coffee mornings, their laughter mingling with neighbors' voices. Mia, the shy teenager, started sketching murals on the community center's walls, her confidence blooming after Scout's quiet companionship. And Leo, the boy who had once hidden from the world, was now a fixture at Scout's side. His sketches and stories of the bravest puppy ever passed around like treasures. But it was Scout's latest stop that set the stage for something bigger. One crisp morning, as Clara's mail truck rumbled past the park, Scout broke from his route and trotted toward the old community garden at the edge of Willow Creek Lane. The garden, once a vibrant hub of flowers and vegetable patches, had been abandoned since budget cuts shuttered the community center 5 years ago. Its beds were overgrown with weeds, the wooden benches splintered, and the sign, Willow Creek Community Garden, faded to near illegibility. Scout sat in the center of the main path, his white-patched eye fixed on the rusted gate, his tail wagging slowly as if inviting someone to follow. Ellen, trailing him as had become her habit, stopped short, her notebook open in her hands. She wrote, November 1st, 8:55 a.m., Scout at Community Garden. Hasn't been here before. Something's up. Clara pulled the truck over, joining her on the sidewalk. What's he got in mind now? She asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and trust. Leo, who had started tagging along on Scout's walks, ran up, his backpack bouncing. Is he looking for someone? He asked, crouching beside Scout, who nudged his hand with a soft whine. I don't know, Ellen said, but her eyes scanned the garden, its neglected state tugging at her. She remembered the garden in its heyday. Tom had loved tending their small plot, his hands caked with soil as he planted tomatoes and marigolds. The memory stung, but it also stirred something else, possibility. Maybe he's not looking for a person this time, she said slowly. Maybe it's a place. Clara's eyes lit up. You think he wants us to fix it? Ellen hesitated, her old caution flaring, but Scout's steady gaze pushed it aside. Could be, she said, her voice firmer. Let's find out. Word spread quickly. By noon, a small group had gathered at the garden, Mrs. Larson with her gardening gloves, Timmy and his mom with shovels, the Henderson twins with a camera to document it all. Mr. Miller shuffled over, leaning on his cane, and even Ruth, bundled in a scarf, arrived with Clara's help, her face bright with purpose. Leo stayed close to Scout, who lay in the sun near the gate, watching as the group surveyed the overgrown beds. It's a mess, Mrs. Larson said, hands on hips, but nothing a little love can't fix. Ellen took charge, her organizational instincts kicking in. We'll need tools, seeds, maybe some lumber for the benches, she said, pulling out her notebook to make a list. And volunteers, lots of them. The group nodded, their enthusiasm infectious. Leo tugged at her. Sleeve, can I help? Scout wants it to be pretty again. Ellen smiled, ruffling his hair. You're in, kid. We all are. Over the next week, the garden became a hive of activity. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years worked side by side, pulling weeds, turning soil, and planting bulbs for spring. The Parkers donated lumber, and Mr. Callahan, despite his creaky knees, spent hours sanding new benches. Mia painted a mural on the garden shed, a vibrant scene of flowers and a small brown puppy with a white patch. Scout was there every day, lying in the sun or trotting between workers, his tail wagging as if approving their efforts. Ellen's notebook filled with the transformation. November 4th, 2:30 p.m. Garden cleanup begins. Scout sleeps by tulip bed. November 6th, 10:15 a.m. Mia's mural halfway done. Scout sits for her like a model. The garden's revival sparked something deeper. Neighbors lingered after their shifts, sharing stories over thermoses of coffee. Kids ran through the paths, their laughter echoing where silence had reigned. Even the Johnsons, usually aloof, brought seedlings from their greenhouse, their smiles, shy but genuine. Ellen, who had once preferred her own company, found herself at the center of it all, coordinating schedules and marveling at how Scout's quiet nudge had brought them here. She wrote one night, "He's tending the roots of this place, making sure we don't forget each other." On a brisk morning, as the first light broke over the rooftops, Scout stirred earlier than usual. He stood at Ellen's front door, his blue scarf, knitted by Mrs. Larson, slightly askew, his eyes bright with a purpose Ellen hadn't seen in days. She opened the door and he trotted out, his limp barely noticeable, heading not for Clara's truck but toward the community center at the edge of the garden. Ellen grabbed her jacket, texting Clara and Leo, "Scout's moving. Meet me at Tao." The center. Her notebook stayed behind. This moment felt too sacred for pen and paper. Scout led the way, his small form weaving through the garden's paths, past Mia's mural and the Scout's Place sign. Ellen followed, her breath visible in the cold air, her heart pounding with anticipation. Clara caught up, her mail truck parked haphazardly, and Leo ran from his aunt's duplex, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. "Where's he going?" Leo asked, his voice a mix of excitement and worry. "I don't know," Ellen said, but she trusted Scout's instinct, the same instinct that had found Ruth and countless others. They reached the community center, a low brick building shuttered since the garden's closure years ago. Scout stopped at a rusted shed behind it, its door ajar, and sat, his tail wagging faintly, He let out a soft bark, his first in days, and nudged the door with his nose. Clara stepped forward, pushing the door open. Inside, cobwebs draped the corners, and old gardening tools leaned against the walls. But in the center, half buried under a tarp, was a wooden box, its lid warped but intact. Ellen's pulse quickened as she and Clara pulled it free, dust swirling in the dim light. Leo knelt beside Scout, who watched with those steady, knowing eyes. Clara pried the lid open, revealing a bundle of yellowed envelopes tied with twine, their edges brittle but the handwriting clear. Ellen's breath caught as she read the date on the topmost letter, March 14th, 2003. "These are from Margaret's route," Clara whispered, her voice thick. "The day of the storm. She never got to deliver them." She lifted the bundle, her hands trembling. The envelopes bore names Ellen recognized, neighbors who had lived here then, some still around, others gone. There were birthday cards, thank you notes, a letter addressed to Ruth Cole in Margaret's neat script. Ellen knelt, her fingers brushing the letters. "He knew," she said, her voice barely audible. "He's been carrying her route all this time." Scout's tail thumped and Leo's eyes widened, his sketchbook forgotten as he reached for an envelope. "We have to deliver them," Leo said, his voice firm despite the tears in his eyes. "For Scout. For Margaret." Ellen nodded, a surge of purpose washing over her. They carried the box to Scout's place, where neighbors were already gathering, drawn by the news of Scout's latest mission. Ruth arrived, pushed in a wheelchair by Mrs. Larson, her face lighting up at the sight of the letters. "Margaret's handwriting," she murmured, taking the letter addressed to her. She opened it, her hands shaking, and read aloud, "Ruth, you're stronger than you know. I'm always with you. Love, Em." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she smiled, clutching the letter to her chest. Scout rested his head on her lap, his eyes half closed but content. The neighborhood rallied once more, dividing the letters. Among those who could deliver them, some went to original recipients, Mr. Callahan, who wept over a card from his late wife, the Parkers, who received a neighbor's thank you for a long-forgotten kindness. Others went to families of those who had moved or passed, each delivery a moment of closure, a promise kept after 20 years. Ellen, Clara, and Leo walked the route together, Scout ambling beside them, his pace slow but steady. At each house, stories surfaced, memories of Margaret, of the neighborhood's past, of a time when letters carried the weight of human connection. Ellen felt Tom's presence in those moments, his love for this place echoing in every step. By dusk, the last letter was delivered, and the group gathered at Scout's place, the garden aglow with string lights neighbors had strung up. Ruth sat at the center, Scout curled at her feet, his blue scarf bright against his fur. Leo opened his sketchbook, reading a new story about Scout delivering Margaret's letters, his voice steady despite the crowd. "He didn't just find people," Leo said, looking at Scout. "He found the things we lost and he brought them home." The neighbors clapped, their eyes glistening, and Ellen felt a lump in her throat, her hand resting on Leo's shoulder. The stars emerged. Scout stood, his movements slow, and walked to the center of the garden, lying down beneath the Scout's Place sign. He looked at Ellen, Clara, Leo, and Ruth, his white-patched eye catching the light, and let out a soft huff as if saying, "My work is done." Ellen knelt beside him, her fingers in his fur, and whispered, "You did good, little one." The neighborhood stood in quiet reverence, knowing this was Scout's final delivery, a gift of closure and connection that would linger long after he was gone. The December chill had settled firmly over Jefferson City, blanketing Willow Creek Lane in a quiet frost that softened the edges of the neighborhood. Ellen Harper's porch, once a solitary outpost, was now a place of pilgrimage, where neighbors left notes, baked goods, or simply paused to share a memory of Scout, the scruffy puppy who had transformed their lives. The community garden, Scout's place, glowed with the warmth of string lights and the steady stream of visitors tending its winter-dormant beds. Ellen's notebook, a sacred record of Scout's journey, lay open on her kitchen table, its final pages filled with the weight of his last delivery. November 25th, 7:30 p.m. Scout led us to Margaret's letters, delivered them all. He rested, After, like he knew it was enough, the puppy's slowing pace had prepared them for what was coming, but nothing could dull the ache of his absence. Scout had passed peacefully a week after the letters were delivered, on a crisp evening in Scout's place. Ellen, Clara, Leo, Ruth, and a crowd of neighbors had gathered around him, drawn by an unspoken understanding that his time was near. He lay beneath the garden's sign, his blue scarf bright against his fur, his white-patched eye half closed, but still warm with that knowing calm. Leo knelt beside him, reading from his sketchbook, his voice steady as he shared a story of Scout's final adventure, delivering love to a neighborhood that had forgotten how to feel it. Ruth held Scout's paw, her tears silent, but her smile radiant. Clara hummed a soft tune, one Margaret had loved, and Ellen stood close, her hand on Leo's shoulder, her heart full of gratitude and grief. Scout's last breath was a sigh, a gentle release, as if he'd completed his mission and could finally rest. The neighborhood hadn't been the same since. The silence where Scout's tiny paws once tapped was profound, but it was filled with a new kind of sound. Laughter, conversations, the hum of a community knit together by his quiet love. Ellen, who had once wielded a broom to shoo him away, now carried his memory like a light, her days shaped by the connections he'd fostered. Her notebook entry from that night read, December 2nd, 6:45 p.m. Scout passed in the garden. We were all there. He didn't save us. He showed us how to save each other. She'd underlined the last sentence, a truth that anchored her. The morning after Scout's passing, Willow Creek Lane gathered at Scout's place for a quiet ceremony. No one had planned it. It simply happened as if Scout had left instructions in his wake. Neighbors brought flowers, handwritten cards and small tokens. A tennis ball, a tiny knitted scarf, a drawing from Mia. Leo, his eyes red but his chin high, placed a wooden box beside the garden's sign, filled with Scout's blue scarf, his favorite stick, and a silver tag engraved with "You Found Us." He read from his sketchbook, his voice breaking only once. Scout wasn't just a puppy. He was our friend, our hero, and he never left us, not really. The crowd stood in silence, their breath visible in the cold air. And then, one by one, they added their own words, thank yous, memories, promises to keep Scout's spirit alive. Ellen took the lead in what came next, her organizational instincts now a gift to the community. She and Clara proposed a permanent tribute, a statue of Scout to stand in Scout's place, a bronze likeness capturing his gentle tilt of head and wagging tail. Leo, with Ruth's encouragement, started a fundraiser, his sketchbook drawings shared online to spread the word. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from neighbors, former residents, even strangers who had heard Scout's story through local news. Messages accompanied the funds. Scout reminded me to call my sister. He made our town feel like home. Within days they'd raised enough for the statue and a plaque, which Leo insisted should bear a line from Ruth's letter from Margaret. You're stronger than you know. On a brisk morning, as the first light broke over the rooftops, Scout stirred earlier than usual. He stood at Ellen's front door, his blue scarf, knitted by Mrs. Larson, slightly askew, his eyes bright with a purpose Ellen hadn't seen in days. She opened the door and he trotted out, his limp barely noticeable, heading not for Clara's truck but toward the community center at the edge of the garden. Ellen grabbed her jacket, texting Clara and Leo, Scout's moving. Meet me at Tao, the center. Her notebook stayed behind. This moment felt too sacred for pen and paper. Scout led the way, his small form weaving through the garden's paths, past Mia's mural and the Scout's Place sign. Ellen followed, her breath visible in the cold air, her heart pounding with anticipation. Clara caught up, her mail truck parked haphazardly, and Leo ran from his aunt's duplex, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. Where's he going? Leo asked, his voice a mix of excitement and worry. I don't know, Ellen said, but she trusted Scout's instinct, the same instinct that had found Ruth and countless others. They reached the community center, a low brick building shuttered since the garden's closure years ago. Scout stopped at a rusted shed behind it, its door ajar, and sat, his tail wagging faintly. He let out a soft bark, his first in days, and nudged the door with his nose. Clara stepped forward, pushing the door open. Inside, cobwebs draped the corners, and old gardening tools leaned against the walls. But in the center, half buried under a tarp, was a wooden box, its lid warped but intact. Ellen's pulse quickened as she and Clara pulled it free, dust swirling in the dim light. Leo knelt beside Scout, who watched with those steady, knowing eyes. Clara pried the lid open, revealing a bundle of yellowed envelopes tied with twine, their edges brittle but the handwriting clear. Ellen's breath caught as she read the date on the topmost letter, March 14th, 2003. "These are from Margaret's route," Clara whispered, her voice thick. "The day of the storm. She never got to deliver them." She lifted the bundle, her hands trembling. The envelopes bore names Ellen recognized, neighbors who had lived here then, some still around, others gone. There were birthday cards, thank you notes, a letter addressed to Ruth Cole in Margaret's neat script. Ellen knelt, her fingers brushing the letters. "He knew," she said, her voice barely audible. "He's been carrying her route all this time." Scout's tail thumped and Leo's eyes widened, his sketchbook forgotten as he reached for an envelope. "We have to deliver them," Leo said, his voice firm despite the tears in his eyes. "For Scout. For Margaret." Ellen nodded, a surge of purpose washing over her. They carried the box to Scout's place, where neighbors were already gathering, drawn by the news of Scout's latest mission. Ruth arrived, pushed in a wheelchair by Mrs. Larson, her face lighting up at the sight of the letters. "Margaret's handwriting," she murmured, taking the letter addressed to her. She opened it, her hands shaking, and read aloud, "Ruth, you're stronger than you know. I'm always with you. Love, Em." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she smiled, clutching the letter to her chest. Scout rested his head on her lap, his eyes half closed but content. The neighborhood rallied once more, dividing the letters. Among those who could deliver them, some went to original recipients, Mr. Callahan, who wept over a card from his late wife, the Parkers, who received a neighbor's thank you for a long-forgotten kindness. Others went to families of those who had moved or passed, each delivery a moment of closure, a promise kept after 20 years. Ellen, Clara, and Leo walked the route together, Scout ambling beside them, his pace slow but steady. At each house, stories surfaced, memories of Margaret, of the neighborhood's past, of a time when letters carried the weight of human connection. Ellen felt Tom's presence in those moments, his love for this place echoing in every step. By dusk, the last letter was delivered, and the group gathered at Scout's place, the garden aglow with string lights neighbors had strung up. Ruth sat at the center, Scout curled at her feet, his blue scarf bright against his fur. Leo opened his sketchbook, reading a new story about Scout delivering Margaret's letters, his voice steady despite the crowd. "He didn't just find people," Leo said, looking at Scout. "He found the things we lost and he brought them home." The neighbors clapped, their eyes glistening, and Ellen felt a lump in her throat, her hand resting on Leo's shoulder. The stars emerged. Scout stood, his movement slow, and walked to the center of the garden, lying down beneath the Scout's Place sign. He looked at Ellen, Clara, Leo, and Ruth, his white-patched eye catching the light, and let out a soft huff as if saying, "My work is done." Ellen knelt beside him, her fingers in his fur, and whispered, "You did good, little one." The neighborhood stood in quiet reverence, knowing this was Scout's final delivery, a gift of closure and connection that would linger long after he was gone. The December chill had settled firmly over Jefferson City, blanketing Willow Creek Lane in a quiet frost that softened the edges of the neighborhood. Ellen Harper's porch, once a solitary outpost, was now a place of pilgrimage, where neighbors left notes, baked goods, or simply paused to share a memory of Scout, the scruffy puppy who had transformed their lives. The community garden, Scout's place, glowed with the warmth of string lights and the steady stream of visitors tending its winter-dormant beds. Ellen's notebook, a sacred record of Scout's journey, lay open on her kitchen table, its final pages filled with the weight of his last delivery. November 25th, 7:30 p.m. Scout led us to Margaret's letters, delivered them all. He rested, After, like he knew it was enough. The puppy's slowing pace had prepared them for what was coming, but nothing could dull the ache of his absence. Scout had passed peacefully a week after the letters were delivered, on a crisp evening in Scout's place. Ellen, Clara, Leo, Ruth, and a crowd of neighbors had gathered around him, drawn by an unspoken understanding that his time was near. He lay beneath the garden's sign, his blue scarf bright against his fur, his white-patched eye half closed, but still warm with that knowing calm. Leo knelt beside him, reading from his sketchbook, his voice steady as he shared a story of Scout's final adventure, delivering love to a neighborhood that had forgotten how to feel it. Ruth held Scout's paw, her tears silent, but her smile radiant. Clara hummed a soft tune, one Margaret had loved, and Ellen stood close, her hand on Leo's shoulder, her heart full of gratitude and grief. Scout's last breath was a sigh, a gentle release, as if he'd completed his mission and could finally rest. The neighborhood hadn't been the same since. The silence where Scout's tiny paws once tapped was profound, but it was filled with a new kind of sound. Laughter, conversations, the hum of a community knit together by his quiet love. Ellen, who had once wielded a broom to shoo him away, now carried his memory like a light, her days shaped by the connections he'd fostered. Her notebook entry from that night read, December 2nd, 6:45 p.m. Scout passed in the garden. We were all there. He didn't save us. He showed us how to save each other. She'd underlined the last sentence, a truth that anchored her. The morning after Scout's passing, Willow Creek Lane gathered at Scout's place for a quiet ceremony. No one had planned it. It simply happened as if Scout had left instructions in his wake. Neighbors brought flowers, handwritten cards and small tokens. A tennis ball, a tiny knitted scarf, a drawing from Mia. Leo, his eyes red but his chin high, placed a wooden box beside the garden's sign, filled with Scout's blue scarf, his favorite stick, and a silver tag engraved with "You Found Us." He read from his sketchbook, his voice breaking only once. Scout wasn't just a puppy. He was our friend, our hero, and he never left us, not really. The crowd stood in silence, their breath visible in the cold air. And then, one by one, they added their own words, thank yous, memories, promises to keep Scout's spirit alive. Ellen took the lead in what came next, her organizational instincts now a gift to the community. She and Clara proposed a permanent tribute, a statue of Scout to stand in Scout's place, a bronze likeness capturing his gentle tilt of head and wagging tail. Leo, with Ruth's encouragement, started a fundraiser, his sketchbook drawings shared online to spread the word. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from neighbors, former residents, even strangers who had heard Scout's story through local news. Messages accompanied the funds. Scout reminded me to call my sister. He made our town feel like home. Within days they'd raised enough for the statue and a plaque, which Leo insisted should bear a line from Ruth's letter from Margaret. You're stronger than you know. The statue was unveiled in mid-December, under a sky heavy with the promise of snow. The garden was packed, neighbors spilling onto the paths, their faces a mix of joy and sorrow. The sculptor, a local artist moved by Scout's story, had captured him perfectly. Scout sitting, his white-patched eye gazing upward, his scar just visible above his paw. The plaque read, Scout, the puppy who delivered love. You're stronger than you know, Leo spoke at the unveiling, his voice clear despite the crowd. Scout showed us how to find each other, he said. This statue means he'll always be here, helping us remember. The applause was soft, reverent, and Ellen's eyes stung as she clapped, her hand finding Clara's for a moment of shared strength. Life on Willow Creek Lane moved forward, but Scout's legacy was woven into its rhythm. The garden became a gathering place, hosting potlucks, story hours, and quiet moments of reflection. Leo's book, The Bravest Puppy Ever, was published with help from a teacher, its pages filled with his drawings and stories of Scout's adventures. Every school in the county received a copy, and Leo read it aloud at Scout's place, his confidence a testament to the puppy's impact. Ruth, now settled in a nearby assisted living home, visited the garden weekly, her wheelchair pushed by neighbors, her stories of Margaret keeping the past alive. Ellen, who had once lived for solitude, now hosted coffee mornings, her porch a hub of laughter and connection. The neighborhood started a new tradition, the Scout Walk. Each morning, someone, Clara, Leo, Mrs. Larson, or even Mr. Miller, retraced Scout's route, stopping at houses where kindness was needed. They checked on the Wilsons, brought soup to Mia's family, or sat with Mr. Callahan, keeping the spirit of Scout's detours alive. Ellen joined often, her notebook replaced by a small journal where she wrote letters to Tom, telling him about the community he'd loved, now reborn. Scout gave us back to each other, she wrote. I wish you could see it. One snowy evening, Ellen stood in Scout's place, the statue gleaming under the string lights. Leo was beside her, his sketchbook tucked away, his eyes on the bronze puppy. Do you think he knows we're still doing his work? He asked. Ellen smiled, her hand on his shoulder. I think he always knew, Leo. He trusted us to keep going. She looked at the statue, its gentle gaze a reminder of the puppy who had walked with no leash, only purpose, and made their world whole. Scout was gone, but his love lingered. In every step they took together, in every heart he delivered home.